a name, I think we make it valid. We create a conversation that didn't exist before. So when we call ourselves Dalit, when I say I'm a Dalit person, or when Rohit said he was a Dalit person, or Chandrasekhar Azad Ravan says that, I think we are creating nuances and associations that haven't existed before. For a long time, being Dalit meant being untouchable, being lower, being inherently talentless, being inherently meritless. So when I ascribe that meaning through my body, through my presence, and then I claim that Dalit identity, I'm bringing two inherently contradicting statements together, and I'm making that statement that here is a way you can be Dalit, but you can obviously not be talentless. And if I was talentless, I wouldn't be here, hopefully. So, I challenge that notion. And by doing that, I think, coming back to your question about should we sort of do it together or I think as far as caste is concerned, and I can only speak about caste, it's until people are really, and I don't see about this professor who's, and I don't know their name, and I'm not sure who they are, but I was told that their critique was they're a left-wing figure, and they said, everything's okay, and I understand inherently caste is bad and everyone's equal, but जब वो खाना खाते हैं तो हम उनके साथ बैठ के खाना नहीं खा सकते. तब up their plates because it's just something inside me that creates disgust. So with examples like this, I think as long as people keep thinking the way they do, it will be important for people like me to keep asserting our Dalit identity, to keep spreading this message that there is a way to be proud, there is a way to be who you are, have the education you have, and still be Dalit. So we're refuting that. And as far as the intersectionality of resistance is concerned, I think there are ways to do that by, you mentioned earlier, by understanding each other and creating a dialogue, and by looking inwards and giving space to all kinds of voices. I think that's one way, but I'm not sure if not speaking about being Dalit, and not speaking about being queer is at all a way to go forward. But I think we need to create diverse viewpoints and diverse leaderships also in the movement. And I cannot speak for any kind of movement. I'm barely an activist, I'm a journalist. But from what my limited understanding, what that says is that there should be Dalit women being able to lead the movement and create these different intersectionalities.
Thank you. Vivek, I've already asked you your question, so...
Sorry, I kind of forgot the question.
Well, almost similar to what I asked Yashika, that, when you challenge one hierarchy and one kind of discrimination, does it make you feel empathy for other kinds of movements? And how can you connect with them? As a journalist, you might have thought about it, living in Bombay.
For the longest time, I was under the belief, and maybe it was just sort of, what's the word? It was just sort of enhanced that the gay man hates the lesbian woman. There's always this strong divide. Wherever you go, in whatever spaces, the gay man hates the lesbian woman. There is no ground for conversation. There's no dialogue. There are no spaces where you can meet, come together, speak. And for the life of me, I didn't understand what was going on. So you're already discriminated against for being who you are. And then there's another layer where within the LGBT community, there's other kinds of discrimination. Discrimination against trans people, discrimination against bisexual. And they all come from within. And that was very difficult to, it's not about toppling, but it's just about understanding, as Urvashi also mentioned, about creating spaces for dialogue. And That happened much later, and I'm glad it happened. I'm glad, like I said, there's a time when you can sit face to face and you can talk about these things. Like, I don't care what the cis-het man has to say anymore, honestly. I have no interest in what his conversation is and what he thinks. I am more concerned with the intersections of, and I know that in the community there's so much to do. For me as a gay man, there's so much that I have to do and work on myself constantly. Because there's so much I don't understand, and there's a need to understand and talk about it. So I cannot use feminism loosely. I cannot use being lesbian loosely or being trans person loosely. I have to, be more empathetic.
Thanks.
Yes, we did come together on 377, and then that's great. But again, I always want to know what next. That is something that makes for larger conversations and change.
Sharmila, same question, I think, similar question, that, in America we are taking on race, but race is so interconnected to poverty, and both are so interconnected to the fact that in both our countries, I've been thinking about this, the country where I was born and the country where I live, we have been revisited by a very strong toxic masculinity, and both countries began on a different struggle. India, of course, took on British colonialism through civil disobedience, and United States took on colonialism through civil war. And in both the countries, we forged different paths. We took on a socialist path. The United States took on a capitalist path. And, we tried to tackle the inequalities left behind in different ways. And yet today, both democracies are under threat from this kind of toxic masculinity and vigilantism that we see, and populism. And what I have been grappling with is that, is it because we never took on the basic hierarchy, which I'm harping again, is the hierarchy of gender, because after all, race, caste, class, it all comes from there, and we normalize that hierarchy. And because of that, this toxic masculinity is resurfacing in our politics. And so I would like you to think about that and comment on that.
Okay, well, let me begin first with where you started with the question of race, because it's in the United States, it's a mashup category. So in the census, the current census, the 2020 census is about to come out in the United States, which might introduce some new categories of race. But currently, let's see, we have a mix of pseudo-biological, race has many definitions. One is pseudo-biological, that's the kind of so-called black-white, and we can get into what white is, and is white the same as Caucasian? Because historically, legally, it has not been so in the United States. We have geographic, that's what Asian is, right? Asia is a continent. And Latino or Hispanic, that's a linguistic category, right? It's based on the language spoken by people. So we have geography, language, pseudo-biology, and 100 years ago in the United States, you could throw in theology too. So I always say if I had arrived 100 years ago in the US from when I did, Hindu would be my race. Because Hindu, it's just like Hebrew was the race. It was a race category, and it was actually one accepted by Jews, because the idea of Judaism as a religion is using a Protestant category of religion and imposing it on a very different kind of system, right? So Jews as Hebrews as that, which is both a race and a culture. And Hindu was the same way, right? I'd be that kind of Hindu with a double O. Yeah, like not 007, but 00 Hindu. So that's what I'd be. So we have all that going on, and that's from the first census in the US, where there were three races really, white, black, and Indian. not my kind of Indian, the other kind, right? And it was all going to be about free and unfree, right? That's what the US, the first census is 1790, and much of it is trying to figure out who can be property and who cannot be property. But this Indians from our part of the world have played a really interesting role in both the legal and cultural and political definition of race in the United States since the early 20th century. So some of the most important Supreme Court cases fought on citizenship that has been tied to race. So citizenship was also tied to race in the United States in this way. So naturalization, right? That's the process by which someone who is foreign-born becomes a citizen, was available from 1790 till the 1950s only to white people in the United States. So you could be a citizen if you were born, but if you had come from somewhere else, naturalization was closed off to you if you were not white until the 1950s. That meant from the early 20th century, there have been cases where people have been trying to assert their whiteness. So one of the most famous cases of that is the case of Bhagat Singh Thind versus United States. Thind, for those of you who don't know, was a man from the subcontinent, a Punjabi Sikh who had actually been in the British Army and then had gone to the United States, had enlisted right at the end of World War I in the US Army. He goes to court to prove he's white. Now you'd say, what a weird thing. Why is this man doing this? And there are other cases, by the way, of people from the subcontinent around the time they're doing that. It's because Thind is trying to become a naturalized citizen, and naturalization is not available to him. So this is a landmark case. Anyone who studies citizenship law in the US this is the case taught in law schools, right? So, and the court goes back and forth. They say, you're white, but at the end, and this is what I'll have you think about, is that the court says that Thind is Caucasian, but Caucasian is not white in the United States. So citizenship is available for whites. And so, and the ways in which they test that he's Caucasian is like old school stuff, like looking at your veins and see if you have blue veins and all of this stuff. And then I'll just say one thing, but how did we become Asian? It's only Indian immigrant groups agitated because they were declared white in the 1950s. They agitated in the 80s to become Asian under the US Census so they could avail themselves of affirmative action benefits, right? So by the time I arrived in the US, the census and the government threw up its hand and said, South Asians, define yourself. And that's where we become, I think, that's where the fact that I was trying to act white and so many Indians tried to be white adjacent, which has nothing to do with skin color, by the way, comes from the fact that these historic exigencies made us choose our own race. We still can legally choose our own race in the United States.
Fascinating. Urvashi, you mentioned that we have to build alliances between movements, and this is exactly what Gandhiji did. Mountbatten asked him when India became independent that, Mr. Gandhi, how did you create such a big movement? And he said, I did not create any movement, I joined movements. So perhaps what you're talking about is the way forward, that we understand each other's inequalities and figure out how can we join a common struggle against inequality, which the self-respect movement did, where they connected gender with caste. And Jabala did when she said, I don't know who the father of my child is, and he turned out to be Parshuram, right? So, Urvashi, my question to you is, how do we do this? From all your years of being in the movement, documenting struggles, perhaps you have some words of wisdom before we open up the floor to questions.
I think we're already doing it a lot. We just need to see it. For example, when Vivek talked about the differences between the gay movement and the lesbian movement, but all of those people, including the trans movement and others, came together to fight for 377 and formed coalitions and subsequently came together to fight for the trans bill and so on. So I think there are alliances being built. If you see the women who are protesting the Citizenship Act across India now, from Shaheen Bagh in Delhi to many other places, the issue of women's right to citizenship and equal citizenship as individuals has hardly ever been recognized in this country in practice. It has been there on paper, but in practice, citizenship for us is mediated through family and marriage. And here are women standing up and saying this, and here are men supporting them. So in a sense, I think it's already happening. We need to recognize that it's happening around us. And very quickly, in our own work, because you asked about the hierarchies and understanding, discrimination. So in our own work, for example, as feminist publishers, so I'm a feminist publisher and we publish books about women and by women. And when we started, it was very easy for us to believe that we are going against the grain and we are doing something alternative because knowledge was dominated by men, and the production of knowledge was also dominated by men. So we created content and we produced it, and it was feminist content, but it was limited because it was created from Delhi and was in English, and therefore, by and large, addressed elite middle-class women and was created by them. Then we had to think, how can we be in a country like India and recognize the many marginalizations that exist, of caste, color, religion, location, etc., all of that. So we started to address those. Now, in those, then, for example, when we publish on caste and when we publish writings by Dalit women, we are often faced with this question, which many writers put to us, very legit: why should we give our voice to you and allow you to represent us? We have our own forums where we want to speak out. And this is exactly what I was saying 35 years ago to the male world of knowledge. Why should you choose to represent us? So I have to understand now that the position of power which my work now places me in always needs to be alert to the new forms of articulation that are growing and not to appropriate those. So it's an ever learning lesson. And I think that if you're aware of those kinds of differences, then the dialogues will happen, as long as you don't think you're always right.
Thank you. Wonderful. I'll take 3 questions from the floor, and please keep it short because we just have 9.5 minutes left. Can we start with the woman in blue at the back? Her hands up. On the left. On your left. There. Yeah.
Greetings here.
Yeah, go ahead and ask. Don't waste time.
How could the champions of equality and democracy pursue the annihilation project, like the brushing away this caste intersection from the whole society of the world?
Okay. Can you give the mic to them? To him.
Hello, ma'am. My question is, once a Brahmin came to my home for chanda, and when I offered him a glass of water, then he refused. So my question is, who started this discrimination between caste?
Very good. वहाँ पर एक question. उधर. That side.
Good morning. I'd like to ask the question, how problematic is the notion of, today you see a lot of notions of caste pride among the upper caste, especially Brahmins. There are certain Brahmin associations which tend to, put forward the fact that, yes, we are there and there are only Brahmins for the Brahmins. Especially recently there was a Brahmin conference held, worldwide Brahmin conference. So how problematic is the fact that such associations are forming even today and they represent some sort of a caste pride? Is my question.
Yashika, would you like to go first and keep your answer to just 2 minutes so that, what we can do is then maybe get more questions, yeah?
So I'll start with the question that was asked first, caste pride. So I don't think it's a new phenomena. Caste pride has existed since the caste system has, and I'll get to that as well. Brahmins have asserted caste pride. You see the jut behind the people's cars, or like Brahman, or matrimonials where people are saying Brahmin girl only for Brahmin boy, or Agarwal girl only for non-feminists girl wanted in our family. You know. So you know, those associations of caste pride have always existed. Or 100% pure veg. That's a coded word for being Brahmin. Because pure vegetarianism is an articulation against Dalits who eat beef, Dalits who eat meat. Not that other castes don't, but it was a direct attack on Dalits. And that's why when Dalit pride is now being asserted, it's a response to that kind of caste pride that has always been there. And I think in response to Dalit pride, Brahmin or any other upper caste, not just Brahmins, but all other upper caste people are now saying, we can also say, well, you've been saying. And it's not new, it's not different. But of course, if you want to keep rubbing salt in the wound, go for it. We can also heighten our voices.
Does anyone else want to take a shot at answering this? No. Any other questions? Oh, there's lots. What about starting with that young lady there?
Hi, my name is Bagda. I'm a lawyer and a researcher. My question is to Ms. Sharmila. I find it very interesting and very new that you suggested that in the US you can choose your caste, your race. How does that happen, and what do you mean that Caucasian is not the same thing as white? Could you just explain that? It's really new to me and I just don't understand how that works.
Okay, hold on. We'll take two more questions. Okay, there's somebody here who's been trying for a long time and the person next to him.
Yeah, hi Ashika ma'am. Yeah, so my question is like, you have been writing in English, which is not the case with most of the Dalits even today. So when you are writing in English, which is an elite upper caste language, is it just the language, or like you are asserting and claiming your space here? Which like you're by using a language which is not supposed to be used by a Dalit.
और एक question आपके पीछे जो आदमी बैठे हैं उधर why he's there?
I have few questions. I'll make it short.
One. Please ask one.
We are humans and we are gendering things. Barbie dolls only for girls and cars for boys only. So what are the ways to break the object stereotypes, or what are the different ways to stop gendering the objects? And one more for Vivek, sir. And like in Chhattisgarh, with advocacy, we are like we have included chapters on transgenders on the syllabus of school children. But what about your state situations on the syllabus, on the courses of schools and other things? And one more question for Yashika. I'm an aspiring journalist, but I don't want to get into politics, but in what other things I can get into other than politics? Thanks.
Okay, we'll start with Vivek first, because, and then Sharmila, and then Urvashi.
So I think, you know, about dolls for girls and whatever, cars for boys. I don't, so I just feel that, I think a lot of people today, now I really don't know about at what level in society or whatever, as you would like to call them, they are breaking it. Bilkul. They are breaking it and it's getting there. That's all I can say. And you know, form of entertainment or media is also asserting that in a way. So I think that's happening. And about the syllabus, I don't know of any such change in the syllabus in Maharashtra, because I come from there. So.
So a very quick answer. Not everybody can. It's people from South Asia or the subcontinent in the United States can self-select their race in the US Census. And that's because I just gave you a very compressed version of the last 100 years of the history. But we are kind of a test case in that, and the subcontinent is second only to the continent of Africa in its genetic diversity. So that's why. So Nikki Haley, in her voter registration card, Nikki Haley, who's of South Asian descent and the United States representative to the UN, selects white as her race, and she can. According to the laws of the United States, in the 1990 census, about 25% of people of South Asian origin chose white as their race. About 5% chose black, and the rest just filled in the form using terms from indigenous terms, which just shows that a great majority of people from South Asia are actually rejecting all the kind of options that the US government is giving them and kind of filling it with their own words. So the census is, of course, it's a work in progress, right? And white and is not Caucasian, that's just actually in the verdict of Bhagat Singh Thind versus the United States, where the judge said in the end that Thind is Caucasian, but that is not white. And citizenship was at that time, naturalization was reserved for whites only. So that's in the legal papers.
Hi, so to come to your question about using English. First of all, I want to really call out the way we understand English and the meaning and the class associations that we have with English. I think we need to first start with rejecting them. But having said that, I think English has been associated as an upper caste language. It's because not just upper caste, but also upper class. A lot of us when I was a young kid, I worked really hard to sound the way I do. I didn't always do that. I worked in a call center when I was 17, and I got this training to speak like a British person, and I have this mangled accent now. But yes, the decision to write in English was absolutely a conscious one, but not now. The decision to become an English language journalist was a conscious decision. And also Rohit Vemula's last letter, which was in English, really awakened something inside me and shifted something inside me because I hadn't read anything by the Dalit person in English before. And of course, that doesn't mean English versus Hindi binary is something we should, that's not what I'm commenting. I'm just saying it was an awakening. It was an awakening for myself. And I think more Dalits should read and write in English so we can create a global audience for our work and our content.
Thank you. We just have 3 seconds left, so no more questions. But I think I'm just so privileged to be part of this panel. Thank you all for the work you do and what you will continue to do. And perhaps gender fluidity will offer us the hope of fluidity in all other hierarchies. Thank you.
All of our panelists will be signing books in the book signing tent, which is out of our venue to the left towards Mughal tent. And I'll also just announce that Ruchira Gupta will have her books in the tent with her, so you don't need to rush to the bookstore and then try and rush back. I have got another announcement about a venue change. The 2:30 p.m. session